A very good afternoon to everyone joining us either from a rainy Singapore or somewhere else in the world. My name is Aisha Al-Sarihi, and I am a research fellow at the Middle East Institute here at the National University of Singapore. It is my great pleasure to be moderating today's webinar, which is jointly hosted by the UAE Embassy in Singapore and the Middle East Institute. As we know, in less than 3 weeks from now, the UAE is hosting COP28, and by far the UAE is the fourth Arab country to be hosting this major climate event. And the UAE is hosting COP28 at a time where we stand at a critical juncture. We stand at the half point between the Paris Agreement, which was adopted in 2015, and the 2030 deadline for the greenhouse gas emissions to decline by 43% in order for us to avert the catastrophic impacts of the climate change. The expectations for this year COP are very high. The expectation for the COP is to be a course correction COP. So in this webinar, I am very pleased to be joined by esteemed panelists, both from the UAE and from Singapore, to discuss various aspects around the COP28. We will discuss different questions, including what to expect from this year's COP. Will this COP accelerate our transition from ambition to action? And what are the opportunities that are presented by the COP for other stakeholders rather than the government, such as the business and the private actors? Ghazi Al-Mahri to give the opening address for today's panel. Ms. Sarah Ghazi Al-Mahri, she is joining us from the UAE, and she is the Director of Diplomacy at COP28. She was previously the Head of Economic, Political, and Media Affairs section at the Embassy of the UAE in Spain. Ms. Sarah, thank you very much for joining us, and I give the floor to you.
Thank you so much. Good afternoon, everyone. I'd really like to thank our embassy in Singapore, the Singapore National Climate Change Secretariat, and the National University of Singapore's Middle East Institute for organizing this very timely seminar on COP28. So my friends, we're just 3 weeks away from convening COP28, which is the world's largest annual multilateral climate event taking place in Dubai under the presidency of the United Arab Emirates. It will see the participation of over 70,000 delegates and more than 140 heads of state and government, really reflecting the global urgency for climate action. COPs have traditionally been a platform where climate negotiators meet, review progress, and decide collectively on the way forward for climate action. Over recent years, COPs have evolved into mega events that attract heads of state and government, business leaders, sectoral experts, climate activists, and the public. The entire process is guided by the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, or for short, UNFCCC. The COP28 presidency helps to steer and facilitate these negotiations. To help drive critical elements of the process and support the negotiations, our presidency has selected also ministerial pairs. And on this occasion, I'm pleased to note that Her Excellency Grace Fu, Singapore's Minister for Sustainability and Environment, is working with us on the mitigation element. She was also with us in Abu Dhabi at the recently concluded pre-COP, which were preparatory meetings ahead of COP28. And COP28 will really be a milestone moment to bring the world together under the umbrella of the first global stocktake that will shape a response that accelerates action, ambition, to bridge the gaps that we know we face. The global stocktake shows that we are off track when it comes to keeping within reach the 2015 Paris Agreement goals in holding the rise in global temperatures to 1.5 degrees Celsius. And to do that, we must reduce carbon emissions by 22 gigatons by 2030. And in order for us to accomplish this, the COP28 presidency has really developed an action plan with 4 key paradigm shifts: fast-tracking a just and orderly energy transition, fixing climate finance and delivering on old promises, focusing on people, nature, lives and livelihoods, and underpinning everything with full inclusivity. To fast-track the energy transition, we know we must phase down the use of fossil fuels, that this is both inevitable and essential, but it also must be done responsibly. While we're rapidly building the energy systems of tomorrow that are free of unabated fossil fuels, we know that we must comprehensively decarbonize our energy system of today, tackling both the energy supply and demand simultaneously. So we're really calling for global stakeholders to also triple renewable energy capacity to 11,000 gigawatts, dramatically scaling up low carbon hydrogen, but also double energy efficiency by 2030. To decarbonize the energies we use today, we're seeking to retire coal plants early and are calling on oil and gas companies to eliminate methane emissions and routine flaring by 2030, committing to net zero for Scope 1 and 2 emissions by 2050, amongst other ambitious commitments. These measures are substantial, they're challenging, but they are achievable. And we are convening both the producers and consumers of energy to collaborate and drive these integrated responses to attack emissions everywhere. In the real world, of course, nothing happens without finance. So finance is really a critical enabler of climate action and how we turn ambitions into reality. Climate finance, however, is not available enough. It's not accessible enough or affordable enough where it's needed. First, we need to rebuild trust by delivering on historic pledges, such as the 100 billion commitment in climate finance that was made at COP15. We must reform the architecture of the global financial system to ensure that both public and private capital deliver on our climate ambitions. And our presidency is always encouraged by the commitments made by many, but contributions are still falling short. In addition to the 100 billion pledge, we must also ensure a second replenishment of the Green Climate Fund. We must then build on the progress made at COP27 and operationalizing the Loss and Damage Fund and its funding arrangements, as well as securing early pledges. To deliver a just transition, we will not only need billions, but trillions. And the current global financial system was developed really without consideration for how to enable effective climate action throughout the world. We know that we need to reform the architecture of the global financial system to expand concessional funds, lower risk, and attract capital at a multiple. But we must never lose sight of the fact that the center of our concerns lie people, nature, lives, and livelihoods, with a focus on adaptation and resilience. We must adopt a comprehensive and robust framework for the global goal on adaptation with clear targets, while addressing the disparity between mitigation and adaptation finance. To ensure that we have an kind of all of the above approach at COP28, we're really elevating previously overlooked sectors like health, trade, relief, and recovery on our climate agenda. And finally, inclusion, which is critical, and we are mobilizing for the most inclusive COP. We know that no single party has all the solutions, so success depends on contributions from every country, every community, and every citizen. COP28 must bridge the trust gap also between the North and South and build that platform for progress through partnership. We know that we must mobilize for the most inclusive COP ever and formalize future participation in climate action. Future generations will also have to live with the decisions that we make at this COP. This is why COP28 has appointed our first youth climate champion and has also established the largest ever youth climate delegate program. Climate action is not just the responsibility of national governments, so we will welcome over 1,000 mayors to also attend COP28. We view the private sector as a key delivery partner, and over 30% of COP28 action agenda has a private sector involvement or element. COP28 will also be hosting a business and philanthropy climate forum to catalyze private sector-led finance and action. This will be a CEO-level global gathering to unite philanthropists and global business leaders to unlock new momentum for global progress. So we need both the process, but also the results to be inclusive, ensuring the voices of all are heard. My friends, the hour is late, but we are optimistic that we can succeed. If we show solidarity and unity, there is nothing that we cannot accomplish. Not if governments work alongside the private sector, scientists, civil society, local communities, and indigenous peoples. Not if we leverage the creativity of our entrepreneurs, engage our engineers, empower our youth and our young people. COP28 will be this opportunity to shape our future and advance 2030 trajectories towards meeting the goals of the Paris Agreement. And I look forward to welcoming you all and seeing you all in Dubai this November. And thank you so much for having me today, participating with you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Sarah Al-Mahri, for your insightful remarks and for providing us for a very comprehensive overview of the major issues to be covered during COP28, and also on also touching on the key climate action that are needed to avoid the catastrophic impacts of the climate change. We look forward to see you in Dubai in less than 2 weeks. And I really understand that you have a busy schedule. So thank you very much for your time. And and because of that, unfortunately, we cannot take questions for you. But thank you again for joining us.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me.
So, so in the second segment for today's session, we will have, the panel discussion. And for that, I am joined by two esteemed panelists. We have from the UAE, Professor Ahmed Murad, who is Associate Provost for Research of the United Arab Emirates University. Professor Ahmed holds a doctorate in hydrology from Western Michigan University, USA. His research interests are hydrology, water resources, and isotope hydrology. He is currently a professor of hydrology at the College of Science at the UAE University. Professor Murad is chair of advisory board of Big Data Analytic Center at the UAE University. And he is also a member of board of National Space Science and Technology Center at the UAE University as well. Also joining us from Singapore, Ms. Carissa Tang. She is the Assistant Director for Mitigation Policy at the National Climate Change Secretariat of the Prime Minister Office Strategy Group. Ms. Carissa oversees the team that coordinates across the Singapore government to develop and implement the Singapore's response to climate change. During her 1.5 years at the National Climate Change Secretariat, Carissa has also worked in the technology and global partnerships team. She is concurrently the Assistant Director of Corporate Planning and Organizational Development at the Prime Minister Office Strategy Group. A very warm welcome to both of you. And just before we kick off the panel discussion, I want to give a logistical note to everyone joining us. Please, if you have any questions, please feel free to write the question in the chat box so we can take them after the remarks from the both speakers. So with that, I would like to kick off the discussion for today. As we mentioned earlier, the expectations are high for this year COP to be a course correction COP. Essentially, COP28, also as mentioned by Ms. Sarah Al-Mahri, will be the first COP ever to conclude the first ever global stocktake in the history of climate negotiations. For those who are not familiar with the global stocktake, it is a mechanism that is used by the UNFCCC to measure the progress for the collective progress of countries and other stakeholders in achieving the goals of the Paris Agreement. It states where we stand today and where we need to be. And based on that, the governments and other stakeholders will be required, to enhance their climate mitigation and adaptation ambitions. But not only that, they will be also required to transition from ambition to implementation. And for that, the first synthesis report on the global stocktake was released last month. And the outcome of it are worrying because it states that we are off track on keeping global warming of 1.5 within reach. The report highlights that the temperature will rise by 2.4 to 2.6 degrees by the end of the century. And it recommends that we need to really accelerate our climate action, and we don't have, the opportunity to delay our action. The report also mentions that phasing out unabated fossil fuel is critical to correcting course in charting the path to keep 1.5 degrees Celsius temperature within reach. With that in mind, I would like to kick off the discussion with Professor Ahmed Murad, and I would like to ask you, what role will the UAE host of COP28 play in making sure that the scientific concerns are addressed and ensuring that we do not miss the opportunity of course correction beyond COP28?
Thank you, Aisha, for your introduction, and I am pleased to be among the panelists today discussing the upcoming COP28. As you heard from Sarah, this COP28 will be different than other COPs in order, as it will emphasize in the course correction that related to the target of the climate action, especially temperature is to be to the degree of 1.5 degrees Celsius. COP28 will present a great opportunity to influence the climate action and contribute even to the course action in the global efforts to combat climate action. The UAE can play an important role in ensuring the momentum from COP28 leads to effective and sustained action beyond the conference. How can that happen? Because there are, I think, different way or mechanism that can happen or already exist in the UAE that will support UAE to take a lead in climate action in general. First of all, the UAE can showcase its efforts to transition to the clean energy and serve as a model for other nations. As you know, that UAE implements using a clean energy and by diversity of the different sources of energy. Also, COP28 will be a great opportunity to promote the innovative climate technology and solution. For example, at UAE University, we are going to showcase 14 different patents and research projects with the prototypes addressing climate action issues. Other issue that the UAE can emphasize in the importance of the green finance and investments in climate resilient project. COP28 organized different sessions related to the green finance, even though at UAE University, we are going to have a session to our workshop in green finance in collaboration with Singapore Management University. Also, UAE can promote nature-based solutions such as reforestations and ecosystem restoration to sequester carbon and enhance ecosystem resilience. One of the Example is palm-made project, sustainable cutlery from date palm waste. Youth engagement. Engagement of the youth will be important pillar of the COP28, as they will be engaged heavily in different activities related to the COP28. University Climate Network, UCN, which involve more than 33 universities in the UAE, join this network and will be heavily engaged in the activities in the COP28. Fall semester ends in the UAE before November 30th, which will allow opportunity for our students to, to visit COP28 and engage with the scientists and different organizations that will, present the best practices related to the climate action. Last things, UAE can remain actively engaged in international climate forums and initiatives, ensuring that the climate agenda remains the top priority and the commitments made during the conference are upheld. As you know, UAE has a strategic initiative for net zero emission by 2050. Another important things that's at the UAE, diversity in renewable energy, as 25% from the electricity of UAE will be generated by nuclear energy after exclusion of the number 4 plant of the Baraka. This is kind of what the opportunities that will be available at COP28 that will address course correction beyond COP28.
Thank you very much, Professor Ahmed, for insightful remarks. Now I would like to move to Ms. Carissa, and if you can please, highlight on what are the key profiles that Singapore will look at this year COP. We know that Singapore has the Singapore Pavilion for the first time last year, and this will be the second time to host the pavilion. So the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Aisha, and thank you so much to Professor Ahmed as well. A lot of you have already spoken about the global stocktake as well as the UNFCCC synthesis report. Indeed, we are not on track to meet the 1.5 degrees Celsius target, but yet we are very optimistic that there are a lot of things that we can continue to do in order to course correct and be back on track to meet this. This is a long-term thing, it's not a short-term thing, so we must take a long-term view and double down on the clean energy transition and give due attention to this existential crisis of our generation. Oh, I'm so sorry. So I was saying that Singapore is a huge proponent of the multilateral efforts at the COP28, and the COP28 is a good opportunity for us to get common understanding on. We are involved in all tracks, but our minister is co-facilitating the ministerial consultations on mitigation together with Norway, and our chief negotiator, Joseph, is the co-chairman with the UK on the joint contact group for the global stocktake. So I'm optimistic that the world will come together this COP28 to step up climate ambition and implementation efforts to make sure that the world has a fighting chance to stay on the 1.5 degrees Celsius trajectory. As a responsible global citizen, Singapore will deliver on the commitments to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions in support of these global efforts. We submitted our strengthened LEDs with a clear goal of achieving net zero by 2050. We also committed to peaking our emissions early with reducing our emissions to 60 million tons of carbon dioxide by 2030. Our carbon tax is actually one of the first of its kind in Southeast Asia. It will be progressively raised up to $50 to $80 per ton, Singapore dollars. It sends a strong price signal to drive industries to decarbonize and give companies greater price certainty to plan ahead. Our carbon tax is only channeled towards decarbonization or adaptation projects. That being said, we've always said that Singapore's ability to decarbonize is contingent on international cooperation. This is because of our national circumstances as a low-lying, highly urbanized, alternative energy disadvantaged country. We cannot be fussy about the decarbonization pathways we are taking. So we are pursuing all viable options such as carbon capture, utilization and storage, low carbon energy solutions, carbon credits, and a lot more. The international acceptability at COP28 and buy-in for these solutions are very important to allow us to continue to pilot and adopt these solutions. So I'm really glad that Singapore and UAE have a lot of interest in common. Both countries are interested in decarbonization solutions, especially CCS, and we are interested in collaborations in financing. This puts us as good like-minded partners for COP this year. On the GST, there's a strong expectations that parties will agree on the steps needed to close the gaps to meet the long-term goals of the Paris Agreement and foster just, alternative, and viable transition pathways towards net zero and climate resilient development. COP28 will also need to implement the decisions that aim to strengthen support to developing countries. In particular, we need to deliver on the mandated work streams on loss and damage and adaptation at COP28. A key guiding principle would be for the work of the transitional committee is that those most responsible for climate change must take the lead in minimizing, averting, and addressing loss and damage, particularly in countries that are vulnerable to the adverse impacts of climate change. Lastly, we must make progress towards the long-standing climate finance commitments. Meeting the $100 billion goal by 2023 as outlined in the Climate Finance Delivery Plan published at COP26 is a key deliverable for COP28. This would really help engender trust and is a critical building block in the discussions on the new collective quantified goal on climate finance. So as mentioned by Aisha earlier, yes, indeed, we have a pavilion, and that's because we believe that climate action is not solely the role of governments. There are many players in the ecosystems that need to be involved in this effort. So that's why at COP28, we don't just have negotiation tracks, but the presidency and many countries are also organizing many events and many pavilions to enable a space for people from different governments, businesses, non-government organizations, international organizations, even our youth to exchange ideas, sign agreements, and actually move the envelope beyond just the negotiation tracks. Many COP presidency events like the FCLP, the Coal Phase Down efforts, the World Climate Action Summit will be places where many governments can come together to make actual substantive commitments and move implementation forward. In addition, I understand youth is a very huge part of COP28 this year, and similarly, Singapore is actually sending a few youth for the first time as part of the Singapore delegation. And they'll be running some of the programs at our pavilion as well. So that's how we are trying to engage our youth in these efforts. Yeah, okay. So I guess I'll stop here for now. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you very much, Carissa. Now I want to throw the question to both of you. Again, it is on the global stocktake. So I would like to ask, what initiatives implemented or planned to be implemented by the UAE and Singapore in response to the urgency presented by the global stocktake? If I can start with you, Professor.
Yes, thank you very much for this questions. UAE has implemented several initiatives in response to the urgency presented by the global stocktake. First of all, sustainable transportation. If we look to the sustainable transportation, the UAE is investing in sustainable transportation solution, including the development of electrical vehicle infrastructure, public transportation networks, and initiatives to reduce emissions from the transportation system. Two, for energy efficiency measures, the UAE is implemented energy efficient technologies and practices across various sectors with a focus on reducing energy consumption and emissions. For research and innovation, the UAE is invested in research and innovation to develop and adopt advanced technologies and practice for mitigating and adapting to climate change. Carbon capture and storage, CCS, the UAE is exploring the potentiality of CCS, which is carbon capture and storage technologies to capture and store carbon emission, especially from the industrial process and power generation. Also, the UAE has intensified efforts to expand its renewable energy capacity, particularly through the development of solar and wind energy projects. Finally, climate adaptation strategies, international climate agreements, and public awareness and education. As you see, UAE has clear climate adaptation strategy, followed the Paris agreements, and even I think international climate agreement in general, and intensify the efforts to increase the awareness of the importance of the responsibility, I think, to taking lead to educate people to reduce the climate change impacts. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Murad. Carissa?
So in Singapore, in terms of how we are actually looking at our decarbonization plans, there are two big things that we hang a lot of our policies on. So first is our carbon tax. And the carbon tax actually is meant to incentivize a lot of the companies to really think about their emissions and think about whether or not there are better ways of doing their businesses and reduce emissions at the same time. So that is a very good incentive. And the money that we get from there actually goes into the government's pot to fund decarbonization projects in order to spur more of this kind of projects in Singapore. So that's one mechanism. The other mechanism that we have is the Singapore Green Plan. And the Singapore Green Plan is basically a whole of government as well as a whole of Singapore approach to looking at decarbonization as well as environment and sustainability. So if I were just to zoom into two areas, that we have our power sector, which we are trying to decarbonize. That is one of the bigger emitters of our emissions in Singapore, as well as the industry side. So on the power side, what we're trying to do is actually Singapore is our grid is already very clean. We use mostly LNG, and we have like very little coal. It's only about 1%. But at the same time, we continue to see that we should be phasing down coal completely. And we are trying to reduce our grid efficiency factor so that we make it even cleaner. So one way we've done is by accelerating the use of solar in Singapore, and that has been the key thing that we have been pushing over the past few years. We've covered most of our HDBs and our tall buildings with and our households with solar panels, but that alone is unable to allow us to decarbonize our entire country because it's most likely only going to be up to 10%. And so that is why we are pursuing other ways of bringing in renewable energy into Singapore. So we have a lot of engagements as well as cooperations with countries in our region to look at bringing in green electrons as well as renewable energy to ensure that we have low carbon electricity for our country. Secondly, of course, we are looking at the new kind of power sources such as hydrogen and ammonia. And these are future solutions that we see to power our country and to ensure that our entire grid is clean in order to move towards net zero. On the industry side, yes, it is a hard to abate sector, which is why we are similarly pursuing a lot of carbon capture, utilization, and storage efforts. We have a lot of research into carbon capture and utilization, looking at other solutions such as mineralization. And we also are pursuing carbon capture and storage. In Singapore, we do not have the space to store this carbon dioxide, which is why international cooperation to see partner countries that we can work with in order to capture and permanently this carbon dioxide is important to us. And I think lastly, we have a lot of measures in transportations and buildings. We have a commitment to phase out a lot of our petroleum and our diesel cars and vehicles and move towards electric vehicles. We also pursue aggressively building energy efficiency targets. And lastly, of course, on carbon credits, I think that this is something that we are looking both from the perspective of global decarbonization, helping countries in many countries to find solutions to reduce emissions, but at the same time also to be with the financing to support these projects and also help our companies in the hard abate sectors to decarbonize. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Carissa. Now, also another challenge or another way to actually ensure that we meet the goals of the Paris Agreement, we shouldn't only depend on the role of the government, but we, as Sarah also mentioned, we need an inclusive climate action, where we engage everyone on board, like the youth, the NGOs, as well as the private sector. So my question to Professor Ahmed, how can the COP28 provide a platform for the private sector to incentivize the inclusion of the private and participation of the private sector in climate action?
Thank you very much. I think inclusion private sector and other even partner in climate action, negotiation and dialogue during COP28 is one of the theme of the COP28. As you know, that the government of the UAE identified 10 pillars for the next 50, one of which is the international collaboration. And if we look in details into international collaboration, we'll find that private sector is one of the important prospects related to the international collaboration. So COP28 will be an excellent platform, I think, to engage, different community, different stakeholder, different partner, private, NGOs, and all of that to contribute to the climate solution. Example of that, it will be business forums and summit, stakeholder workshop engagement, will be youth engagements and empowerment. As mentioned that, for example, the delegation of Singapore will include the youth in order, I think, to empower them and to contribute to the by organizing different session and workshop in Singapore Pavilion, Climate Action Hub, COP28 also, and SME Climate Hub for MENA region, COP28 and also Climate Hub for MENA is a collaboration between COP28, UAE presidency, and SME Climate Hub to drive climate action in private sector across the Middle East and North Africa. Also, COP28 presidency is partnering with Masdar, first Abu Dhabi Bank and Abu Dhabi Chamber, to create a legacy platform that will become a focal point of sustainability activities of SMEs in the MENA region. As one of the COP28 UAE presidency flagship private sector initiative, COP28 and SME Climate Hub for MENA is available to business in the region completely free of charge. It is also one of the first global sustainability platform of its kind available in the Arabic language as well as English and Spanish. Through this climate hub, MENA SMEs will have access to free and comprehensive resources and tools that will enable them to make a climate commitment, take action, and measure their progress toward emission reduction in line with scientific benchmarks. This access to information, measurement, and reporting tools will help businesses to bridge their knowledge and resources and resource gaps and make concrete progress in climate action, paving the way to a net zero future. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Professor Ahmed. Carissa, you mentioned that Singapore has adopted the Green Plan. I wonder to what extent, or if you can explain, how does Singapore engage the private sector in, implementing or achieving its climate targets?
I think that the key way in which the Singapore government actually engages the businesses is by having a very clear direction in which we are moving towards. And what the Singapore Green Plan really does is to set out the targets, the direction for the businesses, the policies that are in place that businesses can then respond, because it presents a very stable and clear governance structure. And that really encourages business practices in Singapore. So that's one way as a governance structure. The second thing is, of course, in blended and green financing, the public sector alone would not be able to meet the scale of investments required. So to encourage the channeling of private capital to support Asia's, like not just Singapore, but Asia's low carbon transition, we have a Singapore Green Finance Action Plan that supports the mainstreaming of green and sustainable financing. There's also the establishment of green finance centers and the development of capabilities to originate innovative sustainable financing and climate resilient investment strategies. In fact, Singapore is actually a leading hub for green finance, accounting for about half of ASEAN's green bond issuance and loan originations in 2020. So we facilitate a lot of like this kind of cross-border financial flows at scale to green and transition sectors. And we also actively involve in efforts to develop like compatible taxonomies in Asia and globally. So if that's mostly from our finance sector, for a lot of our businesses, they have made a lot of commitments because we house a lot of MNCs. And so part of the MNCs is that they have a lot of commitments to net zero as well for their companies. So naturally, I think when it comes to Singapore, and being in Singapore allows them to be clear about what pathways are there for them forward towards net zero, both in Singapore as well as in their home country. So these are just some ways that we engage our businesses. To also share that at the pavilion, we're bringing a lot of business partners to COP28. They have been really excited to partner us, and they'll be bringing many of the different solutions there, as well as it's a great opportunity for them to network with each other, with the Singapore government, as well as with other people from other pavilions and other business partners.
Well, thank you very much. So another also angle when it comes to accelerating climate action is collaboration and collaborative efforts between countries. Either it is like a bilateral or multilateral collaboration. And last month, the Singapore Prime Minister Lee visited the UAE, and along with the UAE President Sheikh Mohammed, they both witnessed a signatory of a flurry of memorandum of understanding and agreements in areas of green economy, low carbon energy solutions, and other climate-related areas. And of course, the UAE is the only Gulf country that signed a comprehensive economic partnership with Singapore. And so my question is for both of you. What are the business opportunities and key areas of synergy that the UAE and Singapore can tap on to enhance their collaboration on climate beyond the negotiations of the COP28?
Yes, let me answer this question from my perspective. What I see, I think both UAE and Singapore has a strength in terms of the capacity in terms to contribute, I think, to the climate action through what research and innovation. I think both countries are investing heavily in the research projects that will lead to the technology that will help, I think, to overcome challenges related to the climate action. Second is the youth, the empowerment of youth. We see that both countries, UAE and Singapore, are empowering youth to play a major role, I think, in different sectors, especially in the climate change. Also, international collaboration. I think UAE and Singapore has excellent platform for the international collaboration. As I mentioned previously, UAE identified that's one of the 10 pillars for the next 50s of the nation is international collaboration. That's mean we have a base for building and increasing the network because of the trust that we received from international community, even the commitment of the UAE and the UAE how contribute to the advancement of the climate action. UAE has an excellent, I think, practices across all sectors in, I think, in providing innovative solution to the climate actions issues. Those, I think, the ecosystem, the existing ecosystem in both countries, I think, will help to work together, I think, to reach their initiative. We have a target, net zero by 2050. I am sure, I think, with the collaborative efforts, with the strength that we have with the youth, will be able to achieve net zero by 2050. Thanks.
Yes, so I completely agree, Professor. Achieving our climate targets naturally must move beyond COP28, the negotiating rooms. A lot of the work is done outside of the negotiating rooms on decarbonization solutions, be it low carbon solutions or carbon credits. I think that he's right. There are a lot of similarities between Singapore and the UAE. We are hubs for innovation, green investment, green economy developments, and we are definitely like a gateway to a lot of the different regions, Middle East as well as for Southeast Asia. So I think this is like a good way of collaborating, because naturally the business opportunities, there are a lot of synergies between both countries, especially to grow like green economy business opportunities. We also have, in terms of like other things, specifically, I think that there's a lot of potential for both countries to think about carbon credits as well as CCS, carbon capture and storage. Both of our countries have a E&C sector, and these are not easy to abate, but through carbon capture and storage solutions, we definitely can help with these hard to abate sectors. It's not just about government signing an MOU. It's very important to have high-level government support to signal cooperation between both countries. But as he said, there's also collaborations by our businesses, by our youth, by the non-government sector. I think it's important for our non-government sectors to also collaborate. So there are many areas in which both sides can collaborate on, be it coming up with methodologies for the verification of carbon credit projects to ensure high quality verifiable projects, or methodologies to do accounting for carbon capture and storage. These are growing areas that are not clear what the rules are currently, and definitely space for our academics to collaborate on. And similarly for the technologies, there's so much green hydrogen potential out there, blue hydrogen potential out there, and so much things that our academic institutions can collaborate on. And yes, I understand that actually at COP, our youth are collaborating on are having exchanges already on their phones and WhatsApp to have some kind of joint activities together. So definitely lots of potential during and beyond COP in these areas.
Thank you very much, Carissa. That's really like insightful. I can see that hydrogen, carbon capture, and storage, carbon credits, green investments, and innovations are areas of collaboration, and that can be done through youth to youth collaboration, business to business, as well as government to government. Before I open the floor for the questions, and I encourage everyone to write questions in the chat box to the Middle East Institute event. Before I take the questions, I have one last question for Professor Murad. It is on the legacy of the COP28. As we know, COP27 in Sharm el-Sheikh last year, the legacy of it, or the success of it, is the establishment of the Loss and Damage Fund, which will continue this year for the operationalization of the fund. But apart from the loss and damage, what will be the legacy of the COP28 of the UAE?
The legacy of the UAE, you know, that's always UAE. When organizing any event, they need to be number one and to be unique in organizing any activities. That will make a little bit difficult for those who will come later on. As we organize, I think, Expo 2020, COP28 will be different in terms of the, I think, different achievement that achieved by the COP28 presidency, even before, I think, COP28. Good things, the legacy of the COP28 will be, I think, the legacy of the Zayed, is a pavilion that will be will be organized by the Ministry of Education, and will be will I think display and present all the educational activities and research activity of academic institution, how academic institution engage in that in finding innovative solution to the problem related to the climate action. Also, important things is, as I mentioned, that's the legacy of the school, the legacy of this COP28 will be involvement of the young generation, the future leaders, especially the school student. As we know, that's, I think, the final exam will be finished before COP28, and that will give opportunity to the young and kids to be involved in COP28. The legacy, also the important things, is that this COP28 will be a course of correction and implementation. And this is, again, there are efforts, I think, from the presidency of COP28, which is headed by His Excellency Sultan Al Jaber and his team, I think, to increase the awareness of the different sectors and different partners of the community. Yesterday, I think UAE organized a summit for the summit in faith. Leaders of the were come together, and they discuss the issue how the religion or the faith can contribute, I think, to advancement of the targets related to the climate action. So we are, as a scientific committee, even, I think, we are ambitious. We are, I think, eager, I think, to receive the outcomes of COP28 to be reflected in our academic program, will be reflected and cascaded in our strategic research themes in order to contribute to the, I think, to achieve the net zero strategic initiative by 2050. So in general, there are, I think, this COP28 will be a platform, open opportunity, I think, for different stakeholders in order to contribute without limiting anyone.
Thank you very much, Professor Murad. We also hope and we are confident that the UAE is making the efforts to make the outcomes of the COP this year positive outcomes for everyone. With that, I open now the floor for the questions, and I encourage everyone to, ask the questions that you have. So far, I have a question from Paulo Rebello, who is a PhD candidate in political science at the University of Salamanca in Spain. His question is, I believe, is to Professor Ahmed on Brazil relation with the UAE. He says that the UAE has publicly recognized Brazil as a country at the forefront of sustainable development. How can the UAE and Brazil work together in innovation, sustainable development, and cooperate with one another?
Yes, thank you very much for this question. I think there is a great opportunity, I think, to collaborate between, I think, institutions in UAE and in Brazil, I think, to tackle issues related to the climate change. I believe that both, I think, countries have their own strength in order, I think, to contribute to each other to achieve targets related to the climate action. One of the things, I think, maybe I think we need to have the best the technology transfer as this is one of the issue I think that we need, I think, to excel in it and accelerate in order to achieve the target of the related to the climate action, and the wills and even the leadership of both countries, I think, in support of the sustainability. I think Brazil also has one of the best practices in sustainability, and I think, as both countries, we need to take advantage of using the best practices of those countries and adapt it to meet our climate, adapted to meet our expectation. The competition is very high. We need to be unique, I think, and we need to use the best model that will help us, I think, to achieve the targets and the KPIs related to the climate action. There is opportunities, and we need to invest in the opportunity by, I think, using the best practices in sustainability that available in even Brazil, and even in UAE also we have a best practices.
Thank you very much, Professor Ahmed. I have another question from Terence for both of you. Terence is from the World Bank Climate Warehouse team. He says that we mostly support countries in building up their domestic and international carbon trading infrastructure. And with that, he has two questions. The first question is on the bilateral and multilateral interactions. So he says that the UAE and Singapore are large proponents of Article 6. So based on your expertise in the bilateral and multilateral interactions, what do you think are the largest pinpoints from the host countries regarding Article 6.2 and 6.4 collaboration? Can I ask one of you also to elaborate on Article 6.2 and 6.4? Because I don't think everyone is familiar with those articles. Maybe Carissa, you can go first.
Unfortunately, I don't think I really can. I'm in charge of a lot of the mitigation plans within Singapore itself. I don't know the details of what 6.2 and 6.4 are specifically, but the whole point of Article 6 is basically to create a system to allow international transference of mitigation outcomes. So it's basically if I have mitigation potential in one country and funding in another country, for the country to fund this mitigation potential from another country and be able to say that, okay, I am able to say this mitigation outcomes is applied to the carbon accounting in my country. So the host country would then be the country that is the seller country to sell the mitigation outcomes. And then on the other hand, the buyer countries would be then the ones to put in the financial resources and then buy the mitigation outcomes. And what this does is actually to increase the ability of the whole entire world to have mitigation projects going on, pairing people with the projects and people with the resources to fund those projects. And that is the essence of 6.2 and 6.4. The conversations that are now around this are a lot about what kind of projects are good projects that will really contribute to the mitigation of the whole world. We don't want projects that are not permanent in removing the carbon dioxide emissions, for example. We don't want projects that with leakages, so no permanence, no leakages. We want them to be high quality projects. So that is what the things are. Based on my understanding from what the pain points are, a lot of times it's about identifying good projects, because one of the criteria, which I think is set, is that it must have net gain, so no net harm. And when we understand no net harm, it cannot be just from the perspective of carbon dioxide. It also needs to be from the perspective of, does it help the community? Does it help with the ecosystem and biodiversity? And to find projects that really are good for everyone, that does not cause net harm, it's very difficult to scope that kind of projects. So currently we have methodologies, let's say by Vera or other kind of companies, to to say that these are good projects, to how do you determine what a good project is and how to account for it, but to actually find this kind of projects is not going to be an easy matter. It requires both the host country, project developers, financing people to all understand the project and to spend the time and energy to develop a good project for everyone. The second one is, of course, because this is a very new concept, there's a lot of international agreements that need to go on. Singapore has signed many MOUs with many countries interested in pursuing this kind of projects. But of course, naturally, when we come to the implementation agreements, which we will be hoping to sign at COP28 with some countries, it goes into the details. With, like, for example, your environmental integrity criteria to ensure that the projects are additional, so it doesn't eat into the NDCs of the countries which you are getting the projects from, the mitigation outcomes from. And all these kind of negotiations take time. And I guess that is another, like, I wouldn't call it a pain point, but it's just a process that needs to happen if we are serious about this kind of international collaborations. Okay, so roughly, if that helps with the answering the question.
I think it does. Thank you very much. Professor Ahmed, would you like to comment on this question on Article?
Maybe I will add one point related to the finance, especially Article 6.2 that's refer even to the, I think, funding for the activities related to the infrastructure, and that's, I think, will be even, I think, encouraging the green finance and provide the proper funding, I think, to tackle issue or related to the climate action, especially, I think, to meet the target 1.5 degree Celsius. And that's, I think, if we would like to achieve net zero by 2050, we need even to double the funding available. And that's, I think, encouraged, I think, by the private sector. And this is what happened, I think, in the UAE during the last, I think they work hardly to have a new mechanism that developed in the UAE to finance climate action. Example of that, green investment funds and even public-private partnership, innovation and research grants. All of those, I think, will encourage, I think, will support somehow the funding for the activities related to the infrastructure.
There's another question from Terence as well. He's asking about the role of the multilateral development banks. From your personal assessment, do you think that the multilateral development banks like the World Bank are on track, and how do you think they can do more to support climate finance?
I think private sector, I think, should engage heavily, especially the financial sector, I think, should play a major role. And that's, I think, come under the social responsibility of those financial sector. Financial sector should, I think, play a major role, I think, in, I think, elevate and increase the finance related to the, I think, to the activities related to the climate action. Partnership and international and especially engagement of governmental, semi-governmental and private sector together, that's, I think, will support and will provide like a new model, I think, to support activities related to the financing the climate action activities.
Okay, thank you very much. Another also major question that came in is on the phase down, phase out fossil fuels. As we know, the phase down of the fossil fuel was introduced for the first time in the COP26, and a phase out of all fossil fuels, a language that has been pushed for in last year COP in Sharm el-Sheikh, although it didn't make it to the final text. So for this year, how will the COP28 address the concerns around the importance of phasing out fossil fuel? And will the UAE COP adopt, different language than previous COPs, the COP26 and COP27?
Yes, as you know, COP28 will be course for correction and implementation. All of us know for that. And that will be based in the continuation of the agreed language, which built in COP meetings, especially in previous COPs, and especially language related to the phase out of the fossil fuel and emission reduction. And that will be the main, I think, the language that even established in the Paris Agreement. Okay, so this agreement, we know that calls for a global effort to limit global warming well below 2 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial levels, and pursue efforts to limit the temperature increase to 1.5 degrees Celsius. It recognizes the need to reduce greenhouse gas emission to net zero by mid-century. So COP28 is expected to emphasize the importance of the latest climate science and the agreement, science and the outcomes, especially the report of the IPCC, which is the Intergovernmental Panel in Climate Change. Also, the UAE COP is likely to provide a platform for a broad range of stakeholders, as we mentioned, and that will engage, I think, different stakeholders in one table to discuss issue, and that's, I think, will support, I think, the call for phase out of the fossil fuel, and that's happening gradually. As you see, practice of the UAE, I think, invest heavily in renewable energy, and that's, I think, have a clear strategy that announced to the world about the net zero strategic initiative by 2050. Also the engagement is very important when we engage with the people, and this engagement is significant, especially in COP28, by involving, I think, different, as I mentioned, civil society, private sector, indigenous communities, I think, and that will be part of the discussions, and especially around the fossil fuels and the climate action. For example, in December 15, the thematic day will be related to the energy transition, and that shows the commitment of COP28, the ability of COP28 and the presidency by collective efforts from the leaders and scientists from different of the world to achieve the limit of the temperature, which is 1.5 degrees Celsius.
Thank you very much, Professor Ahmed. Carissa, would you like to comment or?
Oh, yeah, sure. So in terms of the question was on about what we are going to do about coal and whether the language would remain. Yeah, I think that it's very difficult to disagree that we need to do something about coal. And of course, Singapore, we only have 1% of our power mix is coal, so it's easy for us to say that we should be phasing down unabated fossil fuels. We took very early steps to phase out coal in our energy mix since the early 2000s. We shifted from fuel oil to cleaner natural gas, which is currently the majority of our power generation today. I guess, like, when we talk about how the international community deals with this issue, how they might agree that something needs to be done about unabated fossil fuels, it is difficult for a lot of people to say definitively that I can do it within a very short time frame. We need to understand that it's part of a lot of countries' energy security. It is possibly the only way that a lot of people and citizens are getting their energy because they haven't have any other alternatives. So when we think about the issue, we really need to consider if the phase down of unabated fossil fuels is coupled with either other ways of removing the carbon dioxide, either CCS or otherwise, and also renewable energy plans where this low carbon fuels are actually put back into the grid in order to get to the people and the recipients of this power. And all these things are very complex. I'm not going to trivialize how complex these issues are. And I think that is why at the international negotiations, there are many countries that might be tentative about putting in too strong language, and they want a more encompassing language in order to give them time and opportunities to really move towards an outcome that is comfortable for them, but at the same time reaching their climate ambitions and helping the world decarbonize.
Thank you very much, Carissa. So unfortunately, we are running out of time. So I will take one last question from the audience. And the last question is from Mohammed Mamoun, but I rephrase it a bit. The question is on the loss and damage, as the loss and damage committee transition from COP27 to COP28. Are you optimistic about the operationalization of the COP of the loss and damage fund? We know that Abu Dhabi last week has hosted the last meeting for the loss and damage ahead of COP28. And we have seen there's some contentious issues around the World Bank hosting the loss and damage fund. But are you hopeful that an agreement will be achieved during COP28?
Basically, I am optimistic, as I mentioned to you, optimistic that's because there are great efforts, I think, from the presidency of COP28 to have a unique edition of COP28. And I am sure, I think, this will lead, I think, to have the suitable finance related to the lost fund. And there are, I think, especially when we engage the private sector to play a major role in transitioning, I think, to low carbon economy. Public-private partnerships is PPPs. This is important things. Also, the renewable energy procurement, regulatory framework, capacity building, training, research, and development. All of that, I think, will help us, and a clear indication about the will of the presidency of COP28 to achieve the target and have a unique edition of COP28. This is COP28, course of correction, implementation, and UAE is committed even beyond COP28. The efforts of UAE will continue after COP28, as the government, I think, already prepared and negotiators that, I think, will take this strategy, I think, to achieve net zero by 2050.
Thank you very much. Carissa, do you want to comment on this, the loss and damage fund?
Yeah, I unfortunately really have not really been following this, but I am very optimistic that there will be some developments. After all, the discussions at the last COP on loss and damage was already quite a huge step forward. So naturally, we need to move forward with this discussion in order to ensure that we can get on mitigation outcomes, because without some sort of financial sort of incentives and without some encouragement, it is very difficult to expect everyone, especially countries in least developing countries, to want to contribute in a very effective way for towards our mitigation outcomes. So I am very optimistic, and I hope that there will be a great outcome from COP28 on this as well.
I'm so glad that we are concluding our today's session with optimistic notes. And before we close the session, I would like to really thank the UAE Embassy in Singapore in cooperating with us in co-hosting this event. And I have Mr. Mohammed Zain Abdul Karim Al-Zar'ouni, who is the head of economic, political, and media affairs from the United Arab Emirates Embassy in Singapore, to give the closing remarks. So, Mohammed, the floor is yours.
I just wanted to say or thank Dr. Murad, Aisha, and Carissa for your active participation in this event. I was actually very happy to hear from Carissa that there will be youth participants from Singapore. They're sending a delegation to the UAE. That's actually fantastic news to us. The COP28 team that we have back home, the ones that are working with this Excellency Sultan Al Jaber, most of them are from the youth, because the UAE values that. We know that the people who will be affected is actually the youth, right? The next generation who will be affected by climate change. So that's one. But as what was mentioned, COP28 is not just an international event. It will be a pivotal moment in our global quest for sustainability and environmental responsibility. The challenges posed by climate change are pressing and affects every corner of our planet. COP28 provides a unique opportunity for nations to come together to accelerate our collective efforts, combat climate change, and create a more sustainable world for future generations. The impact of COP28 extends far beyond the immediate outcomes of the conference. It is about setting the course for a greener, more sustainable future for all of humanity. The agreements and commitments made at COP28, I'm sure that they will shape the global response to climate change for years to come. It's an opportunity for us to transform words into action, pledges into policies, and aspirations into tangible results. So, let us leave this event with a renewed determination to work together. The future is ours to shape, and together the UAE and Singapore can make a profound impact on the world. I can see that we're very much optimistic from what I've been hearing, and that's the way to go. That's the correct mindset to be in, actually. So before I end, I would like to thank the Middle East Institute for organizing such a meaningful event, and I look forward to the continued collaboration in the years to come. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mohammed. And I echo your optimistic words. Yes, we should approach the COP with optimistic mindset so we can end up with positive outcomes collectively. With that, thank you very much to esteemed panelists, Professor Ahmed Murad and Carissa, for joining us today. Thank you very much for your time. And I would like also to thank our events manager, Sharon Khan. Thank you very much for being with us. And with
Thank
that,
Thank you.
with that, we close the session and have a good evening, everyone.